Dear respected viewers, when we speak of the great minds who shaped human thought, few names shine brighter than Socrates, the philosopher who chose death rather than abandon the truth. But behind every great teacher, there is sometimes a greater listener. And today, we invite you to journey with us into the life of such a man. A young student who witnessed the fall of his mentor and vowed that his voice would not be lost. His name was Plato. Now, Plato was not a king, nor a conqueror. He didn't wield a sword. He wielded questions. He didn't rule lands. He explored the soul. This young man, after seeing injustice, did not seek revenge. He picked up his pen. He began to write. He began to dream. He recorded the words of Socrates so the world would not forget. He imagined a republic governed by reason and justice. He asked, "What is the good life? What is truth? What is real?" And slowly, quietly, Plato built something far more powerful than an empire. He built a foundation for thought that has endured for over 2,000 years. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of a student who became a teacher, of a witness who became a philosopher, of a man who dreamed of a better world and shared that dream with us all. This is the story of Plato. Dear viewers, let us return now to ancient Athens. Not the Athens of triumph and marble glory, but the Athens left behind after the death of Socrates. The year was around 399 BCE. The Golden Age had passed. The city that once lit the world with philosophy, architecture, and democracy now stood bruised and uncertain. Athens had been humiliated in war with Sparta. Its empire lost, its pride shaken, its democracy restored, yes, but fragile and fearful. And in that fragile city, one young man stood in silent grief. His name was Plato. Barely more than 20 years old, he had sat at Socrates' feet, listened to his questions, followed him through the markets, watched him stir the minds of generals, poets, and statesmen. He had seen him not only teach, but awaken. And then he had seen him condemned, not for any crime, but for asking too much. Plato watched his mentor drink the hemlock, calm, dignified, unbending in the face of death. It was a moment that would mark him for the rest of his life. You see, Plato came from a noble family. He could have pursued politics. He could have sought power. But that day, something inside him changed. He saw that truth, when spoken boldly, could shake the pillars of a city. He saw that philosophy, real, living philosophy, was not safe. It was dangerous. It was essential. And so, Plato did something remarkable. He withdrew from the chaos of politics. He left Athens, wandering to Egypt, to Italy, to lands where new ideas breathed. But he did not run from pain. He carried it. He studied. He reflected. He began to write. And slowly, through dialogue and story, he began to revive Socrates, not as a memory, but as a living voice in the written word. Dear friends, imagine a young man with a wounded heart and a burning mind, trying to make sense of the world, trying to bring justice where it had failed, trying to give shape to the invisible truths his teacher had once spoken aloud. That was Plato. Not yet a master, not yet a legend, just a soul in search of meaning, in a world that had forgotten how to listen. And from that search, a new chapter in human history was about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in a person's life, quiet, almost unnoticeable, that change everything. For young Plato, that moment came when he met a man named Socrates. Plato was born into nobility. His family was wealthy, well-connected, and deeply rooted in Athenian politics. He was expected to become a statesman, perhaps even a leader of the city. That was his path. But then, he encountered something, or rather someone, entirely unexpected. It wasn't in a grand hall. It wasn't during a formal lesson. It happened out on the streets of Athens, in the crowded marketplace, or perhaps under the shaded colonnades of the city. There stood a man, barefoot, rough in appearance, with a face that drew neither admiration nor awe. But when he spoke, the city grew quiet. Socrates didn't lecture. He didn't claim wisdom. He simply asked questions. What is justice? Do you truly know what you're saying? Why do we live the way we do? And Plato, a curious, intelligent, and full of youthful ambition, was shaken. This man wasn't giving answers. He was giving something more valuable, the invitation to think. From that day on, Plato followed Socrates. He listened, he asked back. He began, slowly, to change. You see, they were not teacher and student in the way we think of today. There was no classroom, no curriculum, no fee. There was only dialogue. In the marketplace, in the gymnasium, in the heart of the city. Wherever people gathered, there was philosophy. Plato learned that true wisdom wasn't about having information. It was about seeking clarity, about daring to say, I don't know, in a world obsessed with certainty. He learned that the soul, like a body, must be exercised through reflection, conversation, and self-examination. And so, through years of questions, challenges, and quiet revelations, Plato began to evolve, from a noble youth of privilege to a seeker of truth. He would not yet call himself a philosopher, but in his heart, the journey had already begun. Dear friends, when Socrates died, it was not just a man who passed. It was a voice that was silenced. A voice that had dared to question kings, poets, generals, and the soul itself. But one person had been listening more closely than most. And when Socrates was gone, he decided, that voice must not disappear. That person was Plato. You see, Socrates never wrote a single word. He believed that true wisdom lived in conversation, in the living breath between two minds. He feared that writing might fossilize ideas, freeze them instead of letting them evolve. But Plato, he took a different view. He understood that while the spoken word can move a crowd, only the written word can move across time. And so Plato did something remarkable. He began to write, not dry essays or long-winded arguments. He wrote dialogues, vibrant, living conversations, where Socrates himself was the central voice. In these pages, Socrates was not just remembered, he was resurrected. He asked questions again. He challenged the wise. He searched for truth, just as he had in life. These dialogues were more than memorials. They were theaters of thought. Plato placed characters from real life into these philosophical dramas, letting their ideas collide, letting the truth emerge not through declaration, but through debate. And through it all, the reader, even across centuries, becomes part of the conversation. Some dialogues were short and playful. Others were long and profound. Some dealt with virtue, some with politics, others with the immortality of the soul. But they all shared one thing in common. They were not meant to tell you what to think. They were meant to teach you how to think. For older generations like yours, full of experience, reflection, and wisdom hard-earned, these dialogues offer not answers, but a kind of companionship. They invite us to revisit the questions we've carried our whole lives, with fresh eyes. Plato did not write to impress. He wrote to preserve, to honor a teacher, to challenge a world that was forgetting how to listen. And in doing so, he gave Socrates a second life. Not in stone, not in story, but in spirit. That spirit still speaks today. And thanks to Plato, it always will. Dear esteemed viewers, there comes a time in every thinker's life when they stop asking only what is and begin to imagine what could be. For Plato, that time came when he looked around at Athens, the city he loved, and saw confusion, corruption, and contradiction. He had seen injustice take the life of his teacher. He had seen democracy fail under the weight of poor leadership. He had seen wealth and power used not for the good of all, but for the benefit of the few. And so he began to wonder, What would a truly just society look like? What if a city were governed not by ambition, but by wisdom? What if philosophy and politics could walk hand in hand? Out of these questions, he wrote his greatest work, a dialogue known simply as the Republic. It begins with a single question: what is justice? But as Plato's characters, led as always by Socrates, dig deeper, the book becomes something far greater. A blueprint for an ideal state. A city built not on wealth or force, but on harmony. Each class with its role. Each soul with its place. Plato divided his ideal society into three parts: the rulers, guided by wisdom; the guardians, driven by courage; the producers, grounded in discipline and moderation. Just as the soul, he believed, had three parts: reason, spirit, and desire, so too must a just society reflect that balance. But dear friends, perhaps the most striking idea in the Republic is this: that the best rulers should be philosopher-kings. Imagine that, a ruler who seeks no power for himself, who lives simply, who loves truth, who understands that to lead others, one must first master oneself. To many, it was an impossible dream. But to Plato, it was a moral compass. He did not claim the perfect city could ever be built. But he knew we needed a vision, a standard by which we might measure how far we've come and how far we have to go. The Republic is not just political theory. It's a mirror, held up to every society, in every age. It asks, do your leaders pursue truth or applause? Is your society ordered for the good of all or only a few? And what kind of person do you become when you stop asking those questions? For those of us who have lived through decades of change, who have seen wars, revolutions, promises kept, and promises broken, Plato's vision still echoes, not because it is easy to build, but because it is noble to imagine. He gave the world more than philosophy. He gave it hope, wrapped in structure, a dream, drawn in reason. Dear respected viewers, there are moments in life when we stop and ask ourselves, is this all there is? Is the world we see, with its shadows, its noise, its passing seasons, truly the full picture? Plato didn't think so. To him, what we see with our eyes is only part of reality, a pale reflection of something greater. And so he gave us one of the most enduring, mysterious, and poetic ideas in all of philosophy: the theory of forms. Now you may wonder, what is a form? Let us imagine together. When we see a tree, we may see its trunk, its branches, its leaves. But each tree is different. One is tall, another short. Some withered, some in bloom. And yet, despite their differences, we all recognize them as trees. Plato believed this was no accident. He said that behind every object in the physical world, there exists a perfect, unchanging essence. Not in this world, but in a higher one. A world not of wood and water, but of truth. The perfect tree, the perfect circle, the perfect siddhi, the perfect good. He called these pure ideals the forms. To Plato, the world we live in is like a shadow on a wall, flickering, unstable, and temporary. But beyond that wall lies the real source of light, the world of forms. Unseen but eternal, invisible, but more real than anything we touch. He told a famous story, the Allegory of the cave. Imagine people chained in a cave, all their legs facing a wall. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, objects pass, casting shadows on the wall. To the prisoners, those shadows are all they've ever known. But one day, a prisoner breaks free. He turns around. He sees the fire, and then he climbs out of the cave into the sunlight. At first, it blinds him, but then, slowly, he sees the truth. Not shadows, not illusions, but reality. To Plato, we are all in that cave, But philosophy, he believed, can help us turn around and begin the climb. Dear friends, at our stage in life, we've all faced shadows. We've all searched for meaning beneath the surface. And perhaps, in our quietest moments, we've glimpsed a light not of this world. A goodness that never fades. A beauty that doesn't wither. A truth that cannot be broken. That is the world Plato called real. And though we may never fully reach it in this life, he believed we should always strive to remember it, to honor it, and to live by it, even in a world of shadows. Dear respected viewers, some people leave behind statues. Some leave behind gold. Plato left behind minds. After years of writing, traveling, and reflecting, Plato came to a simple but powerful conclusion. If the world is ever to change, it must begin with education. Not education for wealth, not training for status, but a deep, soul-shaping kind of learning, one that teaches how to think, how to reason, how to live. And so, around the year 387 BCE, Plato did something revolutionary. He founded a school, a place not of memorization, but of philosophy. He called it the Academy. It was built in a peaceful grove just outside the city walls of Athens, named after a local hero, Academus. But what grew inside its gardens would echo through centuries. Here, students came not to be told what to believe, but to ask questions together, to challenge each other's views, to explore truth, beauty, justice, mathematics, astronomy, and the soul. There were no blackboards, no diplomas, no exams. Only minds in motion. And Plato, now in his mature years, guided them not as a master above his students, but as a companion on the same journey. He believed that philosophy should not end with writing. It should live in discussion, in contemplation, in community. And so the Academy became not just a school, it became a sanctuary of thought. And from that sanctuary came a student who would one day surpass even the master. A brilliant young man from the north, curious and tireless. His name was Aristotle. Yes, the same Aristotle who would later teach Alexander the Great. The same man whose logic and science would lay the foundation for centuries to come. Plato, you see, did not only preserve the past, he planted the future. Dear friends, at our stage in life, we know the value of passing something on. A lesson, a story, a seed of wisdom. Plato understood this well. He knew that the greatest legacy is not what we leave behind, but what we leave within others. The Academy stood for nearly 900 years, long after Plato's death, through empires, wars, and ages of change. And though its buildings are gone, its spirit still lives. Anywhere minds gather to ask, to wonder, to grow. Dear honored viewers, it's one thing to dream of a better world. It's quite another to try and build it. Plato had imagined a republic ruled by reason, by justice, by wisdom. A city where the philosopher would be king, and the king a philosopher. A place where leaders were not driven by greed or popularity, but by the quiet strength of the soul. It was a beautiful vision. But Plato, like all of us, knew that the real world rarely matches the ideals we carry in our hearts. And so, in his later years, he did something few philosophers dare to do. He stepped into the arena of power. Around 367 BCE, Plato received an invitation from Syracuse, a powerful city on the island of Sicily. There, a young ruler named Dionysius II had just taken the throne. Plato's former student, Dion, believed this was the perfect moment, a chance to bring the republic to life. He urged Plato to come, to teach, to guide, to shape a real king into a philosopher. Plato hesitated. He was no politician. He had seen what happened to Socrates when power felt threatened. But the possibility was too great to ignore. And so, the old thinker sailed across the sea, not for riches, not for fame, but for one last chance to plant truth in the soil of politics. At first, the court of Syracuse welcomed him. He spoke to Dionysius of virtue, of justice, of ruling with wisdom. The young king listened. But listening is not the same as learning. Soon, Plato discovered what many of us already know too well. Power resists change, and those who challenge it are often cast aside. Court intrigues, envy, and fear began to swirl. Dion was exiled. Plato found himself under suspicion. At one point, he was even placed under house arrest. The dream of the philosopher-king fading into shadows. Eventually, he returned to Athens, older, wiser, and perhaps a little heartbroken. But dear friends, Plato did not call this a failure. No, he understood something deeper. That philosophy may not always change rulers, but it must still challenge how we think about power. He saw firsthand that knowledge without virtue is dangerous, that ambition without truth leads to tyranny, and that even if the perfect republic could not be built, the idea of it still mattered. For it gives us something to strive for, to measure ourselves by, to return to when the world grows dark. Dear viewers, perhaps some of you have tried to bring your own ideals into institutions, into workplaces, communities, even families, and met resistance, silence, or worse. If so, then Plato's story is also yours. He reminds us that trying is not weakness, it is courage. And that even when the world rejects the truth, the soul that speaks it stands tall.
Dear valued viewers, some lives shine brightly in their time. Others shine through time. Plato's was one of those rare lives. When he passed away, around the year 347 BCE, he left no empire, no monuments, no statues carved in marble. What he left was thought. Living, breathing, everlasting thought. Through his writings, dialogues that still speak across languages, cultures, and generations, Plato became something more than a philosopher. He became a foundation. His school, the Academy, would continue for hundreds of years, and among its most brilliant students was one who would become a titan in his own right, Aristotle. Aristotle, the thinker who would go on to teach Alexander the Great, who would shape science, ethics, politics, and logic for centuries to come. And yet, it was Plato who first gave Aristotle the tools, the questions, and the fire of philosophy. From Aristotle, the line continues, to the Roman Stoics, who taught moral discipline, to Christian theologians, who wrestled with the soul, to Muslim and Jewish philosophers in the Middle Ages, who preserved and expanded his ideas, to Renaissance artists and Enlightenment scientists, who saw in Plato's forms the bridge between the ideal and the real. And even today, in every courtroom where justice is debated, in every classroom where questions are asked, in every soul that seeks meaning beyond material things, Plato is still present. Dear friends, you know better than most. Legacies are not measured in wealth, but in the values we pass on, in the lives we touch, in the truths we dare to say out loud. Plato lived in an age of war and confusion. He lost his teacher. He watched his city fall short of its ideals. And yet, he never gave up on wisdom. He imagined a better world. He built a place to think. And he gave voice to a man who refused to stop asking, why? Because of him, Socrates still speaks. Because of him, we still wonder what justice truly is. Because of him, the soul still has a companion.
Dear friends, some men are remembered for battles they won, others for empires they built. But Plato, he is remembered for a question, for a conversation, for a dream. He never ruled a city. He never led an army. He never sought riches or applause. And yet, he shaped the very way we think. About justice, about the soul, about the invisible truths that guide a life well lived. Plato dared to believe that the world could be better. Not through force, but through reason. Not by silencing others, but by listening. Not by pretending to know, but by learning to ask. He gave voice to his teacher. He gave structure to our thinking. And he gave the world something no tyrant ever could. A vision of a life led not by fear or greed, but by truth. Dear viewers, as we reach the end of this journey together, may we carry with us Plato's quiet strength. The courage to imagine, the discipline to learn, and the humility to seek wisdom, even late in life. For the soul, as Plato believed, is timeless, and so is the search for meaning. He was a student, he was a teacher, he was a philosopher, but more than that, he was a man who dreamed not of power, but of a world guided by the mind and lit by the heart. He was Plato, and he dreamed a perfect world. Dear respected viewers, thank you sincerely for spending your precious time with us on this thoughtful journey through the life and legacy of Plato. In a world that moves so quickly, it is a rare and meaningful thing to pause, to reflect, and to walk together through the wisdom of the past. Your presence here, your curiosity, your openness, your willingness to listen, is what keeps these stories alive. Plato once said, "The beginning is the most important part of the work." We believe that by returning to the roots of philosophy, by exploring these timeless lives, we are not just remembering history, we are beginning again with deeper understanding. So, from our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this experience. May it stay with you, long after the final word fades. With deep respect, the Echoes of History team.